Liverpool knows how to put on a show. The Liverbirds perched high above the waterfront, the twin cathedrals competing for the skyline. The Cavern Club still echoing with the ghosts of four lads who changed music forever. Ferry boats crossing the Mersey while tourists snap photographs of a city that rebuilt itself from the rubble of war and the decline of industry. This is the Liverpool that appears on postcards. The Beatles Trail, the football grounds, the Albert Dock gleaming after its transformation from derelict warehouse to heritage attraction. But there is another Liverpool. I have walked these streets at hours when sensible people stay indoors. I have spoken to night security guards who refuse to patrol certain corridors alone. I am not here to convince you that ghosts are real. I am here to show you 15 places in Liverpool where something is deeply wrong. Let us begin with something that defies easy categorization. Not a haunting in the traditional sense. Something stranger. Bold Street runs through the heart of Liverpool. A busy shopping thoroughfare leading up toward the bombed-out shell of St. Luke's Church at the top of the hill. On any given afternoon, you will find crowds moving between department stores and cafes. Nothing remarkable. Nothing to suggest that this particular street has become infamous for something that sounds impossible. People have reported slipping through time on Bold Street. The most famous account comes from a former police officer. In 1996, this man was walking down Bold Street when he noticed the street had changed. The modern shops had been replaced by older establishments. A store called Creepiest occupied a building he knew to be a bookshop. People around him wore clothing from decades past. He stood bewildered as a young woman in 1940s attire walked past him and entered a doorway that should not have existed. Then, just as suddenly, everything returned to normal. This officer had no history of mental illness, no reason to fabricate such an account. And he was not alone. Others who worked and lived on Bold Street in the 1960s reported a persistent sense that something was not quite right. When workers descended into the cellar of one shop in 2010, they found unsettling messages scrawled on the walls. One dated to February 1966 read simply, "God have mercy on all who enter here." Theories abound. Some point to the underground railway that runs beneath Bold Street. Others suggest the heavy bombing during the Blitz somehow fractured something in the fabric of the place. None of these explanations satisfy. They simply acknowledge that multiple unconnected witnesses have reported the same impossible thing. The next time you walk down Bold Street on a quiet afternoon, you might notice the buildings differently. You might wonder which doorways lead where they should, and which might lead somewhere else entirely. Not far from Bold Street, in the graveyard of St. Andrew's Church on Rodney Street, stands something that looks profoundly out of place. A 15-foot-high pyramid, Egyptian in style, utterly incongruous among the Victorian headstones surrounding it. This is the tomb of William Mackenzie, civil engineer, railway contractor, and according to local legend, a man who gambled away his very soul. The story told in Liverpool pubs goes something like this. Mackenzie was a prolific gambler who one night found himself at a card table with a stranger. The stakes escalated. Mackenzie lost everything, his fortune, his reputation, and finally, his soul. The stranger revealed himself to be the devil. But Mackenzie was clever. He arranged to be entombed upright inside this pyramid, seated at a table, holding a winning hand of cards. Because if he was never truly buried, then technically he never died. And if he never died, then the devil could never collect his due. The truth is rather more mundane. An inscription on the tomb itself states that it was erected by his brother Edward as a token of love and affection in 1868. Mackenzie died in 1851. He cannot possibly be entombed within a structure built 17 years after his death. Yet the legend persists. Locals report seeing a dark figure near the pyramid at night, a presence that watches, that waits. Perhaps the more interesting question is not whether Mackenzie sits inside holding his cards. It is why Liverpool needed this story. What does it say about a city that it chose to remember one of its builders, not for his engineering achievements, but for a desperate bargain with the devil? The pyramid still stands. The legend still circulates. And on certain nights, when the wind moves through the graveyard in a particular way, you might understand why people prefer the story to the facts. Everyone knows the song. The barber showing photographs, the banker with a motorcar, the children laughing. Penny Lane became shorthand for a cheerful, sunlit Liverpool that existed in memory and melody. But 44. Penny Lane tells a different story. This address was the site of one of the most disturbing poltergeist cases in the entire country. Activity began around the time of the First World War and continued for decades. Long before the song made the street famous, residents spoke of a presence in this building. A young, blonde-haired girl who appeared and vanished. Walls that vibrated without cause. Thuds and bangs that followed no pattern anyone could predict. When local media took interest in the 1970s, more residents came forward. Workers at a printing shop that once occupied the premises described objects moving on their own, cold spots that drifted through rooms, and the overwhelming sense of being watched by something that did not wish them well. The contrast is almost too neat. The song celebrates ordinary pleasures, blue suburban skies, a pretty nurse selling poppies. The reality of number 44 suggests that even the most charming streets can hold darkness that no amount of nostalgia can dispel. The building still stands. The street still draws Beatles pilgrims from around the world. Few of them pause at number 44. Fewer still know what neighbours reported there for the better part of a century. The Adelphi Hotel has welcomed guests since 1826. Frank Sinatra stayed here. Bob Dylan performed here. For over a century, it represented the grandest accommodation Liverpool could offer to visitors arriving by sea or rail. It has also never been empty, not entirely. Staff members speak of Raymond Brown, a page boy who died in 1961 when he became trapped inside the hotel's baggage room lift. His ghost is said to appear in the corridors wearing his uniform, going about duties that ended over 60 years ago. There is also George, a man who took his own life in the hotel during the 1930s. His spirit has a particular habit that disturbs those who encounter it. He shouts from windows to passers-by on the street below, but those who hear him and look up see nothing. In the basement, a Victorian lady has been seen by multiple staff members across different decades. She wears clothing that predates the current building, as if she belongs to an earlier version of the hotel that no longer exists above ground, but persists somehow below. The Adelphi continues to operate. Guests check in and check out, and most notice nothing unusual. But those who work the night shifts speak carefully about certain floors, certain rooms, and certain hours when the building feels occupied by more than the paying guests. On the outskirts of Liverpool stands Speke Hall, a spectacular timber-framed Tudor mansion built in 1530. It is now managed by the National Trust and open to visitors who come for the architecture, the gardens, and perhaps something more. The history of Speke Hall includes a tragedy that locals say the building has never forgotten. Edward Norris inherited the estate in the 16th century. By all accounts, he was deeply religious, but plagued by demons of another kind. Alcohol and gambling consumed him, and debts mounted. His wife Mary watched her husband destroy himself and their family. What happened next has passed into local legend. Mary Norris is said to have thrown her infant son from the window of the tapestry room. The child landed in the moat below and drowned. Mary then followed, taking her own life in the same manner. The White Lady has been seen walking the halls ever since. Staff and visitors report encounters in the tapestry room itself. She appears solid until you look directly at her, and then she is gone. But Mary is not alone at Speke Hall. A transparent gardener tends grounds that no longer exist in their original form. A priest walks corridors that once hid Catholic families during times of persecution. And in the gardens, something else has been reported. A creature described as wolf-like, prowling the grounds at dusk. The National Trust acknowledges the haunted reputation matter-of-factly. They do not encourage ghost hunting, and they do not deny what visitors report. They simply maintain the building and allow people to draw their own conclusions. Beneath Liverpool Cathedral lies a city of the dead. St. James Cemetery was established in the 1820s in a former quarry. The sandstone walls rise dramatically around graves that number in the tens of thousands. Estimates suggest 58,000 bodies rest here, perhaps more. The records are incomplete. Among the documented spirits is William Huskisson. He was a member of Parliament, notable for an unfortunate distinction. He was the first person to be killed by a passenger railway train. In 1830, at the opening of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, Huskisson's leg was struck by the locomotive rocket. He died hours later. His ghost is said to walk the cemetery where he was buried. But he has company. The tale of the Silver Bell has circulated for over a century. A young woman was buried here in the 1800s with a small bell attached to her grave, a precaution common in an age when premature burial was a genuine fear. If she woke, she could ring the bell and alert the living. Whether she ever rang it depends on who tells the story. The records confirm that such bells existed, that people feared being buried alive, and that something about this particular grave has drawn attention for generations. The cemetery closes at dusk. Those who have lingered past that hour report sounds that carry strangely in the quarried space. Footsteps on gravel where no one walks. Bells in the distance where no bells should be. St. George Hall dominates the centre of Liverpool. A neoclassical masterpiece opened in 1854. Concert halls above, law courts within, and beneath the grand facade, something most visitors never see. The Catacombs. During its years as a working court, St. George Hall housed prisoners awaiting trial in cells beneath the main building. Men and women sat in darkness, while above them orchestras played and crowds applauded. The contrast was architectural cruelty of the most British kind. During the Liverpool transport strikes of 1911, police and army were billeted in these underground chambers. During the Second World War, they served as food stores and water reserves. Throughout it all, people reported things that could not be explained. The ghost of a former judge is seen most frequently. He paces the old courtroom late at night, dressed in traditional robes, wearing an expression that witnesses describe as stern and unforgiving. This was a man who handed down harsh sentences, including death. Something of that severity seems to have imprinted on the building itself. In the cells below, visitors report the sound of chains, voices calling for help. The apparition of a man sitting in the corner of a cell. Not threatening, simply present, waiting. The Most Haunted television program investigated St. George Hall during a special live broadcast. Whatever the cameras captured or failed to capture, the reputation endures. Staff members do not like to be alone in the catacombs after hours. Those who have been do not volunteer to do so again. The Liverpool Playhouse opened its doors in 1925. Nearly a century of theatrical productions, performers, audiences, and the particular energy that accumulates in spaces dedicated to make-believe. Some performers never left. A cleaner named Elizabeth died in the building under circumstances that have become part of theatre lore. She was working on the stage when the fire iron came loose from its rigging. It struck her, knocked her into the orchestra pit, and she broke her neck in the fall. Elizabeth is still seen backstage, still going about her duties, still unaware perhaps that her shift ended decades ago. The Grey Lady haunts the stalls. She appears in seats usually when the theatre is dark between performances. Witnesses describe a woman of evident class and refinement. The legend suggests she was an upper-class lady who came to the theatre alone. In her era, this would have been scandalous. She sits alone still. Then, there is the man in the top hat and frock coat. He moves through the building restlessly, searching. The story behind him involves a daughter in a red dress. He brought her to see a show. He stepped away briefly. When he returned, she was gone. He has been looking for her ever since, through the auditorium, through the dressing rooms, through the decades that separate that night from this one. Theatres are liminal spaces, places where reality is suspended by agreement. Perhaps this makes them more permeable to things that should not linger, but do. Croxteth Hall remained in the hands of the Molyneux family until 1972, when the last Earl died without an heir. Liverpool Council took possession, and the public gained access to a building that had been privately occupied for centuries. The hauntings were not news to generations of locals, but in 2009, they became national news. Closed-circuit television footage captured something moving across the grounds at night. A figure emerged from the bushes, moved along a path toward the house, and then vanished. The footage was broadcast widely, and many believed it showed the ghost of Hugh William Osbert Molyneux, the 7th Earl of Sefton. It was the modern age intruding on ancient mystery, a security camera capturing what human eyes had reported for decades. But the 7th Earl is not alone at Croxteth Hall. Two people exploring the basement in 2013 encountered something that disturbed them deeply. A short figure in a cloak, hideous in appearance. They saw it first in the basement, then again on the staircase, where it vanished before their eyes. The 6th Earl has been spotted in his former bedroom. A young boy stands by the fireplace in the dining room. Shadows drift down corridors where servants once hurried to attend to the family above. The hall is open to the public. Families visit for the farm park and the nature trails, but few linger as the afternoon light fades. Those who do understand why. On Fenwick Street stands a pub with a name that tells you everything and nothing. The Slaughterhouse. The building is ancient, one of the city's oldest taverns. Its name derives from a former proprietor who worked as a butcher. The legends that attach to that occupation recall stories of Sweeney Todd, a butcher with customers who entered but did not leave. Meat of uncertain origins sold to neighbours who did not ask questions. How much of this is true cannot be verified. Records from that era are incomplete. What remains is a name and a reputation and a building where staff members report disturbances they cannot explain. Whether the ghosts are victims of the butcher or merely travellers who stopped at the wrong tavern on the wrong night is a question the pub cannot answer. It simply continues to serve drinks in a space where the past refuses to be fully past. Now we must shift to places where the darkness comes not from folklore or legend, but from documented history. From what was done to people in buildings that still stand. Newsham Park Hospital is a Grade 2 listed building in Liverpool that now lies derelict. But its emptiness is recent, and what happened within its walls spans over a century of institutional suffering. It opened in 1874 as an orphanage, the Liverpool Seamen's Orphan Institution, a grand name for a place that housed the children of sailors who died at sea. By 1899, 321 children lived here under conditions that former residents would later describe as harsh and cruel. Siblings were separated. Discipline was severe. In the eaves of the building runs a corridor that staff called the Naughty Boys Corridor, a row of cupboards barely large enough to turn around in. Boys who misbehaved were locked inside and left until they had learned their lesson. The legend persists that one boy was forgotten, left to die in the darkness of a cupboard. His ghost is said to slam the cupboard doors, to peek out when people draw near. In 1954, the building became a hospital with its own psychiatric department. When that closed in 1992, the patients from Rainhill Lunatic Asylum were transferred here. More suffering layered upon suffering already imprinted in the walls. The records of what happened in this building remain sealed for 100 years. Ghost hunters have made Newsham Park their destination. They report activity in virtually every part of the building. But the horror here requires no supernatural explanation. The orphans who shivered in those cupboards were real. The patients who were treated in ways we now consider barbaric were real. The building simply holds what was done to them. References to the site, now occupied by tower buildings, date back to 1256. For 800 years, this location has been continuously significant to Liverpool. The tower of the borough jail once stood here. During the Napoleonic Wars, nearly 4,000 French prisoners were held in conditions that contemporary accounts describe as ghastly and inhumane. Many died. Their bodies were disposed of without ceremony. Current residents have reported hearing chains being dragged down the stairways. Others have seen visions of emaciated figures, men in ragged uniforms, chained to walls that no longer exist in their physical form, but that persist somehow in the memory of the place. Also connected to this area is the story of Rose Poole, Liverpool's oldest recorded ghost story. Rose was declared dead and laid in her coffin awaiting burial. Her husband noticed 5 golden rings on her fingers. He removed them. According to the story, Rose was not quite dead. She revived and found herself robbed by the man who should have mourned her. What happened next varies in the telling, but her restless soul is said to have taken revenge. Her ghost has walked these streets since before Liverpool became the city we recognise today. On the site where the Metropolitan Cathedral of Christ the King now stands there, once existed the largest workhouse in Britain. 4,000 troubled souls were housed here at its peak. The destitute, the desperate, the dying. They came because they had nowhere else. They stayed because they could not leave. In 1862, a fire broke out in the building. 21 children and 2 nurses burned to death in the blaze. The workhouse was eventually demolished. The cathedral rose in its place, a building of striking modern architecture. Concrete and glass reaching toward heaven, from ground that remembers something very different. A dark phantom shadow is reported walking the cathedral steps. Paranormal investigators believe this figure to be a victim of the fire. A child, perhaps. Still climbing steps that lead to a building that no longer exists. Still trying to escape flames that consumed them over 160 years ago. The cathedral serves its congregation. Masses are held. Weddings celebrated. Tourists admire the architecture. Few know what lies beneath. Fewer still consider that the ground was consecrated by suffering long before any priest blessed it. Beneath the streets of Liverpool lies a secret that shaped the outcome of the Second World War. Western Approaches was the command centre for the Battle of the Atlantic. From this bunker, military strategists coordinated the protection of Allied shipping from German U-boats. The port of Liverpool handled most sea cargo entering Britain. If the supply lines failed, the war was lost. Winston Churchill himself said that the only thing that ever really frightened him during the war was the U-boat peril. The operations room has been preserved exactly as it was left when the doors were closed on the 15th of August, 1945. Maps still hang on the walls. Markers indicate positions of convoys and submarines. The telephones are silent now, but once carried information that determined whether men lived or died. This bunker was connected to Bletchley Park. Intelligence flowed between the codebreakers and the commanders. Life and death decisions were made in these underground rooms by men and women who could never speak of what they did. Proportionately more men lost their lives on merchant ships carrying supplies than died in any of the British armed forces. That statistic was determined here, in these corridors, at these desks. A visitor to the bunker reported smelling perfume in a section where a wren had fallen to her death. Others have spotted strange shadows or experienced the sensation of being followed. This is not a haunting in the traditional sense. It is the weight of history concentrated in a space designed to be forgotten. The decisions made here, the losses calculated here, the sacrifices that were deemed acceptable here, all of it persists. The Albert Dock represents Liverpool's transformation. Once the engine of maritime commerce, now a heritage attraction with museums, restaurants, and apartments. The brickwork gleams, the water reflects the sky, and tourists photograph the view. But the dock remembers what it was. The ghost of the hanging sailor is said to haunt the vicinity. Witnesses describe a man in 18th century attire, hanging from a noose, swinging from the masts of ships that no longer exist. People report eerie cries and the creaking of ropes. These sounds occur when there is no wind to explain them, and there is no rigging to produce them. The legend suggests this sailor was executed wrongfully. Press gangs operated in Liverpool for decades. Men were seized from the streets and forced into naval service. Justice was administered swiftly and often incorrectly. Whatever crime this sailor was accused of, he maintains his innocence still. He walks the dock that witnessed his death, reminding those who see him that Liverpool was built on the sea, on the labour of men who had no choice, on punishment administered without appeal. The transformation of Albert Dock from industrial site to leisure destination has not erased what happened here. The brickwork may gleam, but the history remains. These places exist whether we visit them or not. Understanding them is part of understanding where history happened and what it cost. The buildings remember what we prefer to forget. The land holds what we choose not to see.